You have one precious life. How will you make your money work for you? It's time for Sage Money Conversations, where your financial happiness and confidence are always the subject. Here's your host, certified financial planner, Barbara Norman.
Hello and welcome to Sage Money Conversations. We love our listeners, and today we have kind of a tough topic, if you will, but I think it's a really important topic. The topic is memory loss and staying in control of your finances. And we are blessed to have with us Amy Burfitt. Amy works for Monarch Cottages, which is an assisted living facility that specializes in cognitive enrichment. So, Amy, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So I think this is a tough issue because when I think about my own parents, and I think it's across the board, I'm not special. Across the board, people don't want to give up control, but that we reach a point where maybe we shouldn't be touching our finances. So let's start with, how do we recognize the problem and where do we start?
Yeah, that's a good question. Recognizing the problem, we're all working with our older parents, and when do you do that switch of parent to parent your parent? And so the goal is with this type of topic is to make sure that we work with our parents before they have cognitive decline, and that the right steps are taken so that their wishes are able to be enacted by their family or whoever they want. And so with that, there are some definite warning signs. And with, one thing I'll just say is,
let me back up just a second, because working with a parent before they lose capacity, like there's a lot of parents out there that don't necessarily want to share. I know in my family, and this didn't happen until there was some fraud on my mom's account, and it was a nightmare getting it fixed.
Yes.
I can't even begin to tell you. Her credit was screwed up, everything was messed up, and the bank was being really creepy.
Okay.
So it took a bad incident for my mom to say, okay, let's have some oversight. And I think what's great is my sister-in-law checks her bank account every couple of days to make sure there's no activity on it, but she had to give that permission. I went down to the bank, and once a year I have a relationship with the banker, but what are some of the other things that maybe we could do with our parents that's non-threatening to them?
Well, I think a good approach to have these conversations is asking them. So usually there's a story that happens where they have a friend or a neighbor or another family member is going through a challenge with a death or with somebody losing capacity. It is a story that many families have already faced.
You know what? That's a brilliant place to start.
Yes. And so you bring it up in that context and you say, well, what do you think your plan will be when this happens? If this were to happen, when this happens, and then start the conversation around the experience that they don't want to have. And then you can say, okay, well, what steps are you going to be taking to make sure that we can support you the right way? And so that's the way I would initially try to broach the subject.
I love that. Okay, so now I interrupted you, sorry. So now we're going to look at what are some of the warning signs. When do we start taking over?
So this is tough, but if the goal, so scams are rampant right now. And so I think keeping the communication open with your parents, I know for me, I'm just thinking of, I actually was scammed. And if you go to them and share your story with them to alleviate the shame that could be potentially there underlining, wanting to share oh my God, I must have been a stupid idiot, so people don't talk about it, right?
I was tired, I wasn't paying attention, and
or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Or I believe the guy, I don't know why I believed him. I just believed him. So anyway, I would just be very transparent with your parents when it comes to challenges that you're facing with scams, so that if something is starting to happen to them, that they will be forthright in providing you that information. And then I will just say that when they stop being able to pay their bills, when they're just a little bit off on paying bills and having that be on time, any kind of contractual agreements, when they are having difficulty understanding contracts,
Okay.
that is a big red flag. And then if they just start to just go inward and not want to communicate with you about stuff that they used to, I think, very smart people have the ability to cope really well. And so they will put out conversation that they are comfortable with. But then if you try to divert from that area where they are comfortable, and they get very angry and very upset very quickly, they don't have a lot of patience, those are definitely the red flags that you should be thinking
I can
about.
see how that would happen, because none of us want to admit that we need help. None of us want to admit that we're losing capacity. And so
Yep.
I think that defensiveness,
Yep.
you're right. It's sad, but it is an indicator. So, okay. So they're starting to kind of have some of these red flags. What
Yep.
happens next?
So, I will just say that when somebody's starting to have red flags, as I mentioned before, they can become very vulnerable. And they can start maybe trusting people they shouldn't be trusting in their lives, whether that's the very helpful neighbor, but then all of a sudden that relationship can lead to more codependency that isn't healthy. And so, it's just really important to kind of gauge where your parents are at. And I guess I want to say that, that they don't find themselves in relationships that are harming. And if you do have a inkling that something might be going on, you can call or reach out to Adult Protective Services in your area and file a report.
That's huge. And I understand there's a statistic that a lot of the elder abuse actually comes from family members.
Yes.
Unfortunately. And then next on that line is caregivers. And so, well, you're with Monarch Cottages. And so I'm sure you have some pretty strict rules about what your helpers can and can't do. But so, yeah, I think these are people who are well-intentioned or maybe not so well-intentioned that get in and start doing some not so nice things.
Well, and what if there is any, not fix, but when people know that they're being watched, they make better choices. So don't put caregivers or family members in situations where they can make a bad choice.
Okay.
And so maybe that could even be lowering the credit card limit on your parents' credit cards, or lowering.
That's a great idea, but how can you do that? Like, it's an agreement between the credit card company and your parent. How does a child step in and say, we need you to back it off?
So that's where, having the proper foundation of legal documents comes into play.
Okay, so let's talk about that. So there's bad decisions being made. Our parents are being taken advantage of. We need to step in. So Adult Protect Services, talk to us about now these documents and how they get triggered and what we can and can't do.
So the issue with these documents is your parents need to have them before they lose capacity. And so again, the more that you can start having these conversations to make sure that they have something in place, the better. And so with that, there's a power of attorney, there's an advanced care. So there's a power of attorney for healthcare, power of attorney for finances, and then there's the advanced care directive. And that's, I am not an attorney, but I would say that those are like the three main pieces of a trust.
Okay, so we're going to trigger here the power of attorney
for finances.
For finances. And do we have to show that they're incapacitated before we can do that? Is that where that healthcare?
Well, it depends on what the documents say, but what I will say is whoever they have lined up to be their person to advocate for them, that's the time either that you start having these conversations with your parents, or you get that person involved. And because in order to legally enact the power of attorney for finances, it depends on what the legal documents say. A lot of them do say you have to have 2 doctors saying that you are now have the inability to make your own decisions. So you would have to go through those channels. But I will say that sometimes, and again, just having the credit card companies having those power of attorney documents or having that copy, you could potentially be able to support them even when they're not fully incapacitated.
Right. And I know that this is an area that's touching on law, and we're going to get an attorney to come on and talk about this because it's so important. But I can see what you're saying. If I have that directive for finances, I could probably call the credit card company and saying, hey, there's some funny things going on here to protect you, to protect my mom. I think this is what we need to do. And so then it's up to the institution.
Yep. And a lot of the institutions have their own documents as well. So just be prepared for a lot of paperwork.
Okay, that makes sense. And again, we're talking about do this before incapacity is lost. And I think that too is why I go to my mom's banker once a year to say, hey, I'm here. What do we need?
Right. And that is super, super smart. And what I will say is any financial institution that you can build a relationship with before the crisis, the easier it can be, because they aren't just getting to know you. A trust has already been built. If you have those documents in place and they know it, then things can just move very quickly. So I will just say that another thing, the big financial institutions where you're not even having to go in and talk to a teller anymore, that might not be a good fit.
Right. Yeah. The small county credit unions, a place where they know your name when you walk in the door.
Exactly.
Cool.
So when somebody reaches a certain age, I would say probably 70s plus, I would recommend going to a smaller financial institution and, having those transactions done and building that relationship with them.
Okay, so we're going to have the documents, we're going to build a relationship, and now we're going to start making some calls on our parents' behalf. What happens if, the eventual happens, mom or dad has a stroke and or something happens and they totally lose capacity. Now, how do we stay in control?
Well, you have I would just call those documents like they're your key to access. So the other thing is your parents hopefully will share with you, their passwords and logins, or have a space where you can access those things when you need them. So again, you need to have these conversations and say, okay, well,
3 passwords: how to get into my phone, how to get into my computer, and how to get into my Gmail account. From there, you can tell anybody, forgot my password, and you can get in. But those 3 are critical.
Right. And so having those conversations with your parents ahead of time to say, okay, this is the scenario. How am I going to have access to all these things? And you can even say, I don't need access today. I don't want access tomorrow, but what are the steps I take if I need it right away?
Right.
And so hopefully, because you're already on their legal documents, that they would be willing to share with you those steps. And so you would just take those documents and farm them out to all of the financial institutions that need to see them so that you can kind of take that on. Now, I will say, not all families have to take this big piece on themselves. A lot of our clients or my residents have they're called fiduciaries.
That's huge.
That is huge, because a lot of family is just not capable or prepared to manage this area for their family member.
Right. But I
They
think
have
about
their
my
own
own
life.
kids, right? They have their own life and they're just busy as can be. They don't have time to pay my bills. And then we look at the jealousy of the kids. And is one going to be skeptical of the other? Is there going to be
Yes.
some accusations, right, wrong, or indifferent?
Yep.
So a fiduciary, go ahead, run with a fiduciary, because I love this concept.
Yes. So if we think about it, when somebody either passes away or they lose capacity, that is when family dynamics just go crazy.
Right.
Everybody has an idea of what should be done, how it should be done, and everyone's pointing the finger at somebody else, saying what they're doing wrong and how they want to do it differently, and it destroys families.
It's true.
So every family has a story, right? Every family has a story. So involving a fiduciary makes everyone point the finger at the fiduciary.
Common enemy. Perfect.
Yes. And so when a fiduciary is involved, they are the ones in control of the finances and how it's distributed when the person doesn't have capacity. And so the family then is not pointing the finger at each other. They're pointing the finger if they're feeling upset because they didn't get it, they're not pissed off at their their brother. They're all upset at the same person. So, and that person again is just following what the documents say in the power of attorney. So it just, how is this money supposed to be used? And I would say the more detail that you can put in your legal documents to say, okay, well, when I do lose my capacity, I want to stay in California. I want to live near this family member. You can create a plan for yourself, and then the fiduciary will be able to check off those boxes and know what the plan is.
You are reminding me of a story, and Amy, what you're saying is so important. So in this story, it was a doctor who got incapacitated and he was really, really young, and it was up to his kids to pick the place where he would have his assisted living.
Okay.
And the girl that he left, the daughter that he left in charge of it, picked the rattiest, nastiest, cheapest. And this guy was a doctor. He had assets to have the best care possible. And the sad thing was, she just didn't want to spend the money. She was looking after her own inheritance. And to hear stories like that break my heart. And so you're right in what you're saying. Your documents have to say
Yep.
what you want. And especially if you've planned and you have resources, then you can dictate how those resources are spent on you. And they have to follow it. I love that. So a fiduciary, how would somebody find a respected, good fiduciary that they could trust and know that they're not going to abscond with the family money?
Right. Well, the good news is every fiduciary is licensed, and you can find that licensing association online. Might be something like fiduciary.gov. Do not ask me to spell that.
That's okay. We are going to have a fiduciary on next week following you.
Okay.
So this is perfect. We're going to find out about fiduciaries.
Yes. And so, it's very smart practice to get your legal documents together, be very, very direct on what you want for yourself. And this is when you lose capacity, not at death, when you lose capacity. And then you involve a fiduciary because they are a partial party and aren't emotionally invested. And their job is to protect you and your assets.
Pay your bills, report to the beneficiaries. Okay.
Yep.
Amy, I'm going to get into some juicy stuff here because you're
Okay.
with Monarch Cottages. You are doing cognitive enrichment programs. So I'm sure that you are dealing with some family. I'm sure that you are training your employees. Tell us, what can we expect, not expect from a place like Monarch Cottage?
Right. Very, very good question. So again, our marching orders also come from those legal documents.
Mm-hmm.
And so we ask for copies before they move in or even before the decision is made so that we know the right people are involved in this decision. So when our residents come to us, they already do not have capacity for those bigger decisions. Now, can they decide what they want for lunch, what they want to wear that day? Yes, we allow them those decisions, but the actual decision to move into our community is definitely done most of the time by the family or a trusted power of attorney.
What happens when one of the kids shows up and starts giving you marching orders and telling you how it's going to be? Because I'm sure it happens.
Well, oh my gosh, I have too many stories, too many stories to share. Well, we take marching orders from a couple of different people, not only from the documents, but from that resident's doctor.
Okay.
And so we, when it comes to medications, we just have to have a doctor's order for everything, even when it comes to vitamins. So
wow.
just FYI. So we work with the doctor, and families get really mad when they're like, what do you mean? I don't want them to have that vitamin E pill. We say,
I can only imagine.
right.
COVID, immunize, don't immunize.
Yes. So we go, their medical care is dictated by their doctor. And then when it comes to other things, we've had families say, this resident is not allowed to be contacted by X, Y, and Z. We actually, we're not even allowed to tell people that a certain person is there. Like if somebody just calls us on the phone and says, hey, I want to talk to, is Ingrid there? We can't even, because of HIPAA, we're technically not allowed to tell anybody. We redirect them back to that person's power of attorney. And we say, we can't disclose, whether that person is here or not. You need to talk to her power of attorney. And we don't even give them that contact information. They have to figure it out. But yeah, we have to protect that person's privacy. And when it comes to their families, as we all know, that there are a lot of issues with family dynamics and people, not making good choices for their loved one. And so we have to understand what that family dynamic is, and then act on behalf of the resident. Yeah. That is always our number one priority, is acting on behalf of the resident.
So if it's someone coming in and shaking up mom's emotions and stirring it up.
Or yes.
Go, huh?
And what I will say is, people will want to ask their loved one for money. And so again, we just protect our team where our residents don't need money. So if they want them to have money, then we have the money and they can spend it, but we have the money because
so they're really your gatekeepers.
Yep.
All directed by the document, all directed by the advanced healthcare the power of attorney for finances.
Exactly. And it just protects everybody. We don't want our residents just to have cash in their suite, because it just makes them very vulnerable for something to happen, even with the kindest people.
Yeah.
Even if they moved there, they're going to forget that they have the money, and then somebody stole it. And why even go there?
Right. 6 months later, you find it in a coat pocket and it wasn't stolen.
Exactly.
Wow, you've given us a wealth of information. Keeping control of finances is really, really tough for seniors. And so this is a delicate area. If you had advice for someone who had a parent that was starting to lose capacity, from the bottom of your heart, what would you tell that family?
Well, as I mentioned in the beginning of our conversation, it's having these conversations now. It's never too early just to start picking away at getting those answers that you need so that you can truly be a resource to them if and when things go downhill. And nobody expects it. Nobody wants to wake up one morning and say, oh, I've lost capacity and now I'm moving out of my house today. But if you can help them build the plan to stay in control of what happens to them because they've built the plan, that's what I would do. You just need to baby step having these conversations, getting the answers you need, getting them to the right people, meaning an estate planning attorney, to get these documents before a crisis. And because when the crisis happens, then it's almost too late. And then you have to go through a whole nother chain of events, which I'm sure the estate planning attorney can share more with you on that.
Well, and you know what, Amy, you're making me think about, and I'm just going to put this plug in there, is estate planning attorneys. I see a lot of documents that come across my desk and it's a trust and maybe it's 5-6 pages and it just says here, and it doesn't have that detail. And then I've seen some very, very detailed estate plans. And now I'm understanding why it's so important to have an estate planning attorney who sits down, thinks it through, goes through the scenarios, goes through the family members. What are the potential problems we're going to have? I mean, if we're not having those discussions with our attorneys, we're not protecting ourselves.
Exactly. So I wouldn't go through LegalZoom. Again, relationships. It is worth the money to sit face to face with somebody that knows what they're doing, that has done this and has a passion for helping potentially people when they become vulnerable.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like you're putting on your bulletproof vest and creating that bulletproof vest when you're creating those documents. So that's just something to think about. You don't want the cheap one.
You have given us a lot of really good information. You have really gone through the details of it, Amy. You are just awesome. Thank you so much for the time and the knowledge you brought to this. If our listeners want to find you, how do they find you?
Well, I am the sales and marketing director at Monarch Cottage. We are a boutique assisted living specializing in cognitive enrichment in the village of La Jolla. Our website is www.monarchcottages.net, and they can connect with me there. And I would be more than happy to discuss options and how I can be of service to anybody.
I think anybody would be lucky to be working with you because you've got heart and knowledge, and that's a great combination. So thank you today.
Thank you.
Advisory services are offered through Barbara J. Norman, LLC, an investment advisor in the states of California and Texas. The information contained herein should in no way be construed or interpreted as a solicitation to sell, nor an offer to sell advisory services to any residents of any state other than the state of California, or where otherwise legally permitted. All content is for information purposes only. It is not intended to provide any tax or legal advice or provide the basis for any financial decisions. The information contained in this material has been derived from sources believed to be reliable, but is not guaranteed as to accuracy and completeness and does not purport to be complete analysis of the materials discussed. The opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect those of SagePath Solutions and are subject to change without notice.